the work that I've done around adoption. So, uh, prior to last year, I spent the last 10 years working at an adoption camp for transracially adopted youth. And primarily, we were talking about Black youth who were adopted by white parents, right? And one of the things that was so fantastic about that camp is it was a family camp. The youth got an opportunity to spend a week with camp counselors that reflected who they are and reflected, their skin color and their ethnic identity and those types of things. But the parents, they got to spend a week kind of going through this intensive workshops around DEI, around racism, around prejudice, because there was kind of this prevailing notion among the parents that, hey, I adopted a Black kid. There's no way I could be prejudiced because I have a Black kid, or there's no way I can be racist because I have a Black kid. I think some of us may have seen that video of the white man recently with the Make America Great Again hat on with his Black son, and he's really kind of saying in this video, like, I can't be racist. Like, look at my son, and he has this dark chocolate skinned Black kid that some of my friends have joked looked like he was being held hostage in the video. If you all haven't seen that video, you got to check it out. But it's just this notion that because I have a Black friend, or because I have a Black family member or a family member of color, I can't be that, right? Without actually doing the work to realize your biases and areas that you can get better. And this may be the simple fact that you have someone in your life that represents diversity, but you still don't understand diversity. And I think that to a certain degree, that's what we're doing right now. Is we know that we have a diverse student body, but now we're trying to understand it in a way that allows us to be able to live it and breathe it every day, just as a part of what we do, and not have to always think about it. And so that's just, as you were talking, I was like, man, this is like the adoption camp that I worked at. And I would tell you, it was very challenging sometimes to do that type of work. We talked about this last week, but the fragility piece when it comes to having to confront the idea that you still have more work to do. To me, that comes up when we're in these types of spaces, because you want to believe that you are doing the work, but then someone says there's still more work to do. And man, those guards immediately come up and those defenses come up, and you do become very fragile. I wonder, have you seen that at all, or any, as we've been going through this process, just kind of that fragility piece?
The dynamics are complicated. Every institution has their family dynamics, right? I mean, I think it comes out in different ways and it comes out at different levels. So yes, I have seen it. I mean, I think I experience it myself sometimes too, and just like catching myself, and sometimes it's in the moment and sometimes it's after the fact. And, I guess lately I've been just really thinking about how important reflection is, and self-reflection, and both like on your own and with colleagues who you trust, and or whether it's friends or family, just having those taking time for yourself to reflect on what's coming up. Was that white fragility that came up? Was that sensitivity? What just happened? And then having the time and space and some kind of tools to reflect with, whether for some people I think that's writing, for some people it's calling a close friend who knows you and you trust them and you can run, they're not going to judge you. They are going to listen and give you some, critical feedback if that's what you need to hear. So yeah, I think, for me, it really comes down to just self-reflection, a lot of just making sure to take that time.
So moving on to the other aspects of US Prep, I am completely unfamiliar with the work that is being done with some of our school partnerships. Would you mind kind of just filling us in on like what is the school partnership aspect of the work and what's happening in over there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I didn't mention that when I first introduced kind of my overview or 1 minute overview of US Prep. Part of it really is being deeply partnered with our school district. So the initial partnership that we have entered into in our first year of the US Prep work and grant is with Vallejo City Unified. They're our home district. We are right in VCUSD. The school district offices are right down the road on Mare Island, just down from campus. And so it was really a natural fit that they would be the first district that we partnered with in this work. And really it's looking at both partnering kind of on a governance level. So we have governance meetings, I would say quarterly at the minimum. So, and that goes from, superintendent of the school district to HR representatives, folks from the curriculum side of the house. We have a union rep, a teacher union rep who comes to those meetings so that we can really be capturing, the voice of the teachers as well as thinking about any legal issues that may come up as, in the partnership. And those governance meetings really started about this time last year when we, had secured the grant and knew we would be kind of moving forward in this work. And we started with just kind of coming together, like, why are we doing this work? And we did the What's Your Why activity that we do in many different settings. We do with staff, with faculty, with our students. And we did that activity, What's Your Why? And it was really amazing to hear from people who've been working in the school district for some of them for a long time. And it got them excited. I mean, we felt that passion behind why they've been working in what can be a really challenging district for a long time. And kind of to the heart of, our collective why was really about supporting children and families and strengthening the partnership between Toro and the school, our local school district. And so a lot of it is around making sure that the work we're doing that the university is not a silo, right? So that the School of Education is not preparing teachers in a vacuum, sending them out, and that the work that they are prepared to do is not practical for what is needed in the school. So it's really a reciprocal relationship where we are dynamic and supporting the teacher candidates we're preparing and the leaders, preparing principals and school leaders as well in a dynamic way that's responsive to the needs in the school districts, and vice versa. They're informing us, and maybe we can, have some influence or push things in a slightly different direction, provide professional development if that's helpful for them, encourage different kinds of mentorship for novice teachers with the goal of really, improving education for children and also improving retention for the districts. Vallejo sometimes struggles with teacher retention. And I think for them, one of the big hopes out of this work is that by partnering, by really being responsive and dynamic, then we're better preparing teachers to teach in that district and our surrounding districts, and that the district can also better support those novice teachers so they stay. They don't end up teaching a couple years in Vallejo and then move on to a district that may have more resources or, just be able to support them better. I think that answered your question, but feel free to ask follow-ups.
No, it does answer my question. And I'm wondering, I mean, yes, of course, Vallejo is the most convenient. It's right down the street, literally from the campus. But it's also one of the more challenging districts to work with when you have other districts that are kind of, close by to work with. Why is it so important for Toro to have a relationship with the community, with Vallejo in general?
I think the relationship goes back as far as we've been on Mare Island. Um, to me, it's really about if we can't do a good job preparing teachers for the district that literally surrounds our campus, then it's time to pause and reflect on who are we preparing them for? What students are we preparing them for if we're not focused on supporting our candidates to be the best teachers they can be in the district is right there. And yes, there's a lot of room for opportunity. There is opportunity for improvement, and it's kind of similar to the way I feel like our candidates reflect the diversity of the community. Like Vallejo it's reflective of Toro as well. It's a small community in some ways, but also has I think a reach beyond just our geographic area. It's definitely a unique community. I feel like I get to know Vallejo and the surrounding area more and more the longer I'm at Toro. I did not know Vallejo very well before I came and worked at Toro, and it's a unique place for sure. And I feel like the more I get to know it, the more I feel connected and really committed to the work and supporting the community. So yeah, I think it's, for many of us, it's about like, we're here and this is where we want to be doing our work.
Yeah, I think, when we think about E.D.I.E, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think we always think of inclusion as a one-way street, right? As in we are the power holders, and how are we inclusive of other people's X, Y, and Z, right? But really, inclusion is a reciprocal process. It is I include you and you include me. It is I come to Thanksgiving dinner at your house and you come to Christmas dinner at my house. And one of the things that I've really loved about Toro and the GSOE as we really move into this era of E.D.I.E is how involved our staff and faculty are in the Vallejo community. I mean, you could walk into a random community meeting in a random part of Vallejo, and you're liable to see our dean, Dr. Norton, sitting there in a seat having conversation with folks in the community. I mean, there is like a real commitment to working with. And one of the things, a big part of my research looks at that relationship, right? Looks at what does it mean to belong to a place, right? Looks at what does it mean to be a part of a place's community of practice, and how do you then incorporate that into the work that you're doing. One of the biggest critiques of all school institutions is how we often sit on the periphery of the communities that we work in with, right? We are in the community, but we are not a part of the community. And to be honest, you can never really get into the intricacies of E.D.I.E as long as you stand apart, right? Like, you have to stand with a community. You have to be able to see aspects of yourself. You have to be able to empathize, right? And more importantly, you have to be welcomed and accepted by a community. We often forget that just because we are in a community and want to work with a community doesn't mean that the community wants to work with us. And you see that in other places. And so I really appreciate like the dedication. And I say this as someone who does research on, what does it mean to be community leaders, but also someone who is from Vallejo, who grew up, a couple of miles away from Mare Island, and often rode his bike right down there on the waterfront, looking across at the ships and things like that, right? Like it is my home. And so to be able to see and be a part of a collegiate community that is giving back to my hometown is beautiful, and something that I really appreciate. All right, let's keep this conversation going. We don't
Well,
have any.
Ijeoma, can I jump in for just a second? I
Yeah.
think, so often when I meet our teacher candidates as they're in the application process to apply and be admitted to the credential programs, they echo what you just said, which is, they are from the community for the most part, and they really want to give back. They have, some of their journey to becoming a teacher is really varied. They come from, different routes to get there. But I think so often I hear them say, I grew up in Vallejo or, close by. I went to school in Vallejo. This is my home. This is my community. I want to give back. And I think, the work that we're doing through the Diverse Educator Network and all of the initiatives that we have going right now in the GSOE are about like further rooting ourselves in the community so that we're preparing folks who come and say, I want to give back. Then we really want to prepare them to give back and teach the children in this community in the most equitable way possible so that we are, providing opportunities. It's culturally responsive teaching, that we're not perpetuating inequity in in the education of children in the community. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think your journey is is different and a little bit in that way, but so many of our candidates say, like, I want to give back. This is how I want to give back.
Yeah, I taught. I remember the first class that I walked into at Toro. It was so many people in the class that I knew. I was just like, hey, I know you. I know you too. Oh, I know you too. That also like really warmed my heart. All right, now for like the hard question. Uh, what do we got to do to get better? Where are our opportunities of growth at?
I think one priority for me is really looking at as we transform our content and our curriculum, also making sure that the people who are teaching our courses are dynamic and diverse and representative of diverse voices as well, so that I think as you move up in higher ed, it gets wider and wider, right? And so I think we really have to make a commitment to say we want to make sure that the folks preparing our novice teachers or novice leaders are representative of diversity. So I think that's one very concrete action.
For me, and I think maybe it's because I've gotten a few of these emails in the last couple of days, but I wonder how we can make the testing process more inclusive and equitable for our candidates. And I know this is a conversation that has to happen on a broader scale, right? Not just here at Toro, but I think about how many of our community folks are interested in coming and getting their credential. They are capable when it comes to educating young people and educating young people in the ways that we want them to, right? In ways that are community oriented, in ways that are loving, inclusive, equitable, right? But then they run into those standardized tests, and those tests are anything but diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And those serve as real concrete barriers to them being able to go into the classroom and do that's the part to me that I have been really just thinking and racking my brain, like, how do we get some of those barriers to be more responsive to the work that we're trying to do, because they literally keep some of our folks from being in the classroom.
Louise and I were just having this conversation this morning. It really, those standardized tests are not an indicator of who is a strong teacher in the classroom, who makes connections with children who really can push learning forward with kids, diverse, especially kids, diverse students. And there's a lot going on right now at the state level. I think, in some ways, we like to look at the bright side of COVID and the blessings of, this current time we're in. And I think, one of them, and I see it as a mixed blessing for now, but maybe it's going to end up being, a net positive. But right now there is a deferral of one set of tests, the CSET tests, which are, for if you're not familiar with them, are the content area tests. So showing that a novice teacher has the content knowledge they need to effectively teach students. And those have been one of those major barriers that you just talked about, Ijeoma, that we have students who have had to take time off from the program for some of them years, 1-2 years to study for and prepare and take the tests and take them multiple times. And we know that these are not folks who are not going to be effective, that was a double negative. We know these are folks who can be wonderful teachers. They are currently teaching, many of them. And the obstacle is not about whether they can be a great teacher. It's really about how good of a test taker are they. And we know that standardized tests are not equitable. We know there's bias. So there's a lot happening right now. There's a chance that the CSET, one set of tests, could be eliminated as early as summer. But as any of us know who follow education policy, things take time, and things need to be before the legislature multiple times, sometimes before there's any forward movement. But I do think in some ways this deferral that has happened because of COVID, to say, okay, well, we'll allow these folks to go ahead with their clinical practice without these tests, because we have to, because we need people in the classroom. There's already a teacher shortage. We can't have more of a teacher shortage. And then hopefully what we're seeing is this isn't making a big difference in terms of the effectiveness of these novice teachers, whether or not they've passed these tests or not. And so there's a chance that those tests could be eliminated. There's a lot of work. I just saw, like you said, things are coming across the email inbox frequently about work on this. I just saw that some of my former colleagues from University of San Francisco, where I did my doctorate, they just got a grant looking at bias in the CSETs and how to move policy forward and getting rid of the CSETs as a requirement. So I think there is movement there. And, I just had a candidate email me today to say, oh, I just took one of my CSET tests and I heard they might be eliminated. Should I take the next one? And I said, I don't want to discourage you from taking the next one, because we don't know if they're going to go away. Like, I wouldn't plan on the test being eliminated, because I don't want it to slow you down on your time frame. But I feel more hopeful about that than I have ever, because it does feel like there's an opening, and multiple, like you said, multiple people working, multiple organizations and researchers and universities working on moving us forward in that area.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm thinking about one of my students who is I believe they are an excellent teacher, but they get so much anxiety when it comes to the test, and their performance on the test doesn't get better because they're in their head about the test, right? It's not even a matter of, and so, it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like, this is an unnecessary barrier to our youth being able to get access to the things that they need. It's almost, we run into this conundrum a lot where you try to disrupt the status quo, but the status quo continues to create an environment in which only the status quo can survive, right? And so standardized tests is one of those things where it's like, you're going to always run up against the prick when you talk about that, because a lot of our like, just, if I come from a school district that had low test scores and I was a product of that school district, then when I go to college, I'm going to have some challenges just around, getting up to college, standard in certain things. But that's going to have an effect on me when I then try to take a GRE, or I try to take, a LSAT, or I try to take a CBEST, right? Like, and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like I can never escape, because there's always something to remind me of where I came from and where I started. And so, the idea that we may be getting rid of it, that just makes me so happy, because I mean, I just love our students so much, and I think they're so wonderful. And it just pains me to know that that is the thing that is good. And then maybe we can get a whole bunch of other ones. We just tell them, like, no more CSET. Like, maybe that'll be Toro's new campaign. No more CSET. Come get your credential, and folks will just come running.
I love it. It's great.
I like to dream. I like to dream big like that. Uh, all right. Let's see. Where do I want to go next with this? This has been a great
Did you see
conversation.
a comment from our esteemed colleague from Toro, New York? Ruth put in the chat about where is DEI embedded in our curriculum and how are we transforming our curriculum?
Oh, that's a great question. Leave it to Ruth to always come up with the questions that get us thinking.
And she's not
So
going to let us off easy either. She's not
no,
going to
she's
give us
not.
the easy.
No, she's not. Do you want to take a stab at that?
I can start. I mean, I can speak for the the teaching credential program. And for those who don't know, a lot of for our credential candidates, we have, general education credential, preparing multiple subject, our elementary teachers, and then single subject, our middle school and high school teachers, as well as special education teachers. And there's a lot of overlap between the coursework that those two groups take, the gen ed and the special ed teachers. So I can speak to that. We've done a lot of work, and there's still a lot of work to do there. So I will talk, about a few of our courses where we've really focused on embedding DEI, and then maybe I'll touch on the places that we know there's more. So one of our initial courses is the education psychology, classroom management. Pretty much any teacher prep has that. There are different names for it. That one we use Zaretta Hammond's work, so really looking at culturally responsive teaching and neuroscience, what we know about how the brain works. So that combination of understanding how the brain works and how learning happens best, but then also the culturally responsive piece. That has been an amazing shift in that class. So really taking it from kind of more management focused and looking at historical education psychologists to really bringing that course and the content and the work students are doing and preparing for how do they want to create a classroom community, how do they want to create a dynamic community of learners rather than more of a behavior management approach. So I would say that's, that course is often one of the first ones that candidates take. And we have done a lot of work there and looking at, really starting with a foundation of culturally responsive teaching. Another course that has a lot of DEI focus would be our inclusive practices course. So, the I of DEI, the inclusion piece, and recognizing that the supports and strategies that we put in place in classrooms for students who may have learning needs or medical needs are actually going to benefit all students, because we're putting in supports and strategies that we may not even know a typically developing child might actually thrive using, with specific supports that we put in place. So that class also, I would say in terms of how are we transforming the curriculum, it's time to go deeper. It's time to go further than just, one course here and one course here that have been revised and updated. For me, I'm thinking a lot about our literacy courses. And so how do we make sure that literacy instruction is really rooted in inclusive practices, and thinking about everything from diverse representation of the materials that are used in classrooms, what students are reading, to really, I'm using Goldie Muhammad's book. I know that I think you mentioned her before, called Cultivating Genius. So really thinking about our BIPOC students, our Black students, our Latino students from this positive lens. What do they have to bring? Where's their genius? What literacy practices are already happening in their cultures and their communities that we can build on and capitalize in the classroom, rather than this deficit model of thinking of, oh, these are our struggling readers and they're behind. And especially now with, the distance learning that's happened over the past year, I think it's really easy to fall into that, oh, they're below grade level, how are we going to remediate, rather than looking at what genius are they already bringing, what strengths do they have, and then how do we provide them with the tools to be literate on so many levels, both able to read content, but able to listening, speaking, reading, writing, all of the literacy, the historic literacy practices that have been part of the rich cultures of the students in our classrooms.
And I would add to that, I was just actually having this conversation with Louise earlier today. So one of the things that we have done is we've kind of said that our E.D.I.E program is going to kind of become the sun of our school, right? It becomes the thing that everything rotates around and kind of gives life to the other programs and components of the GSOE. And in that, I was thinking like, okay, well, we have to clearly spell out what E.D.I.E is. Like, what are the different components or the different pillars of E.D.I.E? For example, is justice a component of E.D.I.E? And if so, like what do we mean? What is justice? How do we define it? How do we know if, or what aspects of justice in the sense of E.D.I.E do we want to cover or do we don't want to cover, right? And then being able to say, okay, here is the justice pillar. Now let's look at our curriculum in other areas, both in the E.D.I.E program, but in other areas of our school, and say, hey, have you incorporated this into your curriculum? And you can clearly say like, oh no, like we talk about, equity, but we haven't talked about justice. And now we can say, okay, well, we need to make sure that we talk about it, that we implement this pillar into the conversation, right? And so I think the better we can kind of define what our sun is and the different components of the sun, then the easier it will be to be able to map those components out to the different programs and the curriculum that we're providing. And you'll be able to see clearly where the gaps are, right? My grandmother used to always say, like, just because you cook healthy doesn't mean it's healthy, right? I always used to be like, what are you talking about, Grandma, when she would say that to me? But it's just this idea that just because, you're talking about race doesn't mean that your program has an anti-racist curriculum, right? Or just because you're talking about culture doesn't mean that it is culturally responsive. So being able to clearly articulate what these different pillars are, these different components of our sun, and then being able to track them out, I think that will be a lot helpful as we think about how we transform, right? And the other piece of it is I like the word transform because it means that a transformational process has to occur, right? It means to me that from something old, something new emerges, something different emerges, right? And we definitely want to be in that place where we're transforming, we're actually creating this so that it does become embedded in the culture of what we're trying to do. So that would be just the 2 cents that I would add to what you just said there, Paige.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's also around making sure we're capturing student experiences, our candidates' experiences. And I think, you and I have our grand plan of, the phases of our research and the phases of this work and transformation. And I am also wondering, like, where do we capture the student experiences? And where does that come in and how we define E.D.I.E and whether we add a J for justice in E.D.I.E, in how it is expressed in our work with candidates and in the community. But yeah, I've been thinking about that as a real a missing piece at this point. Where are we going to capture the student experience, both good, bad, and ugly, and how we can do better? Because Toro, we're small, and our marketing and recruitment budget may not be the fanciest and the biggest, but word of mouth is really that's where our students come from. They know someone at their school site who got their teaching credential at Toro, or their principal got their admin credential at Toro and says you should check it out, or they know someone in one of the other programs, so their sister got their nursing degree. So I think we really need to make sure that our students are leaving us with, if we're talking this talk, right, that they're leaving us saying, yeah, Toro is really doing the work. And not that we're perfect, we know we have plenty of room to grow, but I think capturing the student experience is another piece for us to think about.
You're right on that. I'm looking at what Michael wrote in the chat and thinking about what you were saying. It reminds me of a student that once came up to me and said, "Hey, I chose to come to the school because the flyer said that it was social justice focused, and I'm trying to find the social justice. I'm looking around, at my professors. My professors aren't very diverse. I'm looking at the diversity of the students, and I'm noticing that certain students have voice and certain students don't have voice, right? And I'm just really struggling with the idea that I came here specifically because I wanted that piece. I wanted to be better. I wanted to learn about myself and how I could be a teacher that kind of disrupts the system. But it feels like everything that I'm getting is just going to continue the same. And it really hurt me when they said that, because like that is our responsibility, right? Like our responsibility is to make sure that we're not just teaching it, but we're living it, and that students kind of walk away feeling like, hey, like everything we did embodied that. Even the way our teacher introduced him or herself, right? Like that, it embodied the core values of what they are and what they do and what attracted me to that school. I think it's easy for us to fall into the complacency of convenience, right? Where we know we're going to get a certain amount of students every year because we're conveniently located in their backyard. And because I don't want to travel out of town to go to school, and I don't want to do it, like you're right here, or you have a partnership with the school district that I work in. And so it's a lot easier for me to go to school here, right? Like we don't want to just rely on our convenience, but we want to really just become a destination for folks because they understand that the work that they're doing there is different. It's different from what you're going to get at other places. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that. Paige, we're quickly approaching the end of our time together. Before we do that, Ruth would like for us to tell us about the work that we are doing with Kevin.
For those of you who don't know Kevin Kumashiro's name, he is a leader in the education world. I last knew him as the dean of the School of Ed at University of San Francisco, and he's since moved on and doing consulting. But I don't know if I'll capture his work, but really he's become a leader in having education leaders step up and say, it is our job and our responsibility to really move the needle forward in the world of E.D.I.E in education. and say, so we attended as a School of Ed leadership. We attended. Thanks, Michael, for putting that link in the chat. We attended as a leadership team for the School of Education. So Ijeoma and Louise and several of our other colleagues, Dr. Redman and Dr. Hames, attended a leadership workshop. I have a hard time when these are called retreats and they're in Zoom. I've decided that nothing that is in Zoom can be called a retreat anymore. But so we did a leadership workshop in January, and really helping ourselves look at, as leaders, how are we walking the walk too? We want, like like we've been talking about, how are we really turning the lens inward and looking at ourselves and saying, where is there more work to do? Where are there gaps? Where are there experiences for our students that are not equitable, that don't reflect what we want to see in teacher education or in education for children in general? So I have a hard time putting it into a little nugget what that work is, but Dr. Kumashiro will also be coming and doing our whole College of Education Health Science virtual retreat next week. So I'm looking forward to how, we've done that work within the GSOE, but then bringing it even bigger into the College of Education and Health Science, kind of our home college here at Toro, California. So stay tuned, more to come on that. Oh, Ijeoma, you're muted.
Yeah, I saw that. And then we have someone who has just thrown glowing praise on you in the chat. They say, it is great to see you and hear you speak on your passion to continue to support teacher credential candidates. I'll never forget your support, help, guidance, and motivation in finishing my credential at Toro years ago. Happy to tell you that I'm currently in my first year at Sacramento State E.D.I.E program. You're definitely one of the reasons why I was able to finish my credential, be a teacher, and continue the journey of being a lifelong learner. Thank you. And that's from Brother Freddie Castro. So you are a rock star here.
Freddie, it's great. I wish I could see you. It's one of the challenges of this webinar format. I want to see your face. I'm so excited for you. That's amazing. Stay in touch. I want to hear how it's going. And I'm sure you're still doing great things in the classroom too. And I'm excited to hear that you've been, working as part of the DEN initiative. So it's great to see your name in the chat and hear your voice, sort of.
Yeah, no, I was just, Freddie, I was just talking about you the other day, man. You're gonna help me write something here pretty soon, because every time I look up, you are right there, just so impressed by you. So we love Freddie and appreciate Freddie, dropping that line. Okay, now that we're even closer to the end, do you have any final thoughts? And we are going to see you in a couple weeks on a totally different topic. Do you want to give us a little bit of highlight of that as well?
Sure. I have a secret life as a human rights educator as well. So part of my work that really complements my work at Toro, but is slightly different focus, is in human rights education. And I'm part of a national network called Human Rights Educators USA. And I'm really excited on March 3rd that one of my human rights colleagues, Marissa Gutierrez Vicario, will be joining me to talk about art and human rights education, and just, how art and the creative, she calls it the join the creative resistance. So really how we can kind of bring together human rights and creative arts and create opportunities for a more just and more equitable world. So I'm excited for that one on March 3rd.
Awesome. We're really looking forward to that. I am super excited because it's something that is different than what I've heard before. So I'm super interested in that session. Next week we will have the Dr. Mari Gray, Dr. Haas, and I just had it. Give me a second. It's coming here. Stacy Southern, who was a vice principal at Antioch Middle School in Antioch, California. They will be with us next week to talk about abolitionist leadership. Just as an additional plug, I will be speaking on their radical educational series tonight from 5 to 7 p.m. And we will be talking about abolitionist leadership tonight. And we have a dynamic panel with us, including, our own Dr. Ramona Bishop will be on that panel with me with two others. So if you all have enough in you to want to do some more webinars tonight, tap in with us at 5. But if not, we will be having that conversation with our webinar series next week at 3:30 to 4:30. And then we'll have Paige and her colleague that are going to be doing their talk on human rights on the 3rd. So we're pushing through. This series is already dynamic, and so I just appreciate all of you for participating. Paige, it was great to see you again. We'll be seeing more of each other today as we have more work to do. But thank you for participating in our conversation today.
Thank you. As always, great to talk to you. And thanks to Michael for keeping everything working on the back end, and Louise for getting us started.
All right, excellent. So we will see all of you next week. Thank you again for joining the Diversity Now series. Is there a link for it's right there. Michael just put it in, Freddie.
I think he means the one that you're doing tonight.
I believe that's it for the one that I'm doing tonight. Yeah.
Radical Educator. There it is.
Yeah. All right. I'm logging off.
Bye.